job was to keep the peace and preserve law and order. It'd be a routine day of work for me and my men. Now and then we had to crucify somebody. We were used to it. Some days we even enjoyed it. Driving nails through a person's palms to fix them to a cross was no problem, especially if it was a Jew. We would do it without hesitation. They would cry and beg, but it was one less Jew that we had to worry about stirring up trouble, that's for sure. We were trained to kill, so we didn't care. We always wondered who would be next to execute the people that we arrested. Sometimes we would even bet on it. I had a pretty good run for a week or two, but on this day the matter wasn't settled until the early morning hours after I'd gone to bed. Two for sure. The everyday kinds of criminals, a couple of thieves, the no-name low-life types, but a political game was being played between our chief of state, Pontius Pilate, who couldn't lead a donkey to water, let alone make a decision on his own, and the chief of the Jewish priests. And as always, the soldiers caught in the middle. Pilate really wanted to execute a political prisoner named Barabbas. We considered him a dangerous revolutionary. He had been arrested because he was part of the insurrection among the Jews to try and overthrow us. Come at us. But the Jewish chief priest wanted Jesus from Nazareth crucified. We had heard of this Jesus, worried about him some, but he didn't seem to pose much of a political threat to us. Do you really need to fear someone who taught love your enemies? He had stirred up quite a religious fuss though, and the priests wanted his head. They were more worried about him than we were. So there we were with a tug of war between our chief of state and their chief of priests, and we all know Pilate is just a spineless bureaucrat. We also knew that their chief priest was much more determined. In time, our guess proved correct. We would be crucifying the religious zealot. It would be easy. Death was routine in my job. It's the way I made a living. The day began as any other day. I had breakfast, my soldiers and I did our usual training drills, and off we went. As I walked through the streets on my way to the palace prison, I sensed that emotions and tensions were running high. Jerusalem was crowded as thousands of Jews arrived for their observance of Passover, one of their religious holidays. To me, religion was for women and Jews, weak people. Almost all of them had an opinion about Jesus. Some were quite fond of him. Many spoke of his kindness towards them, such as when their children had been ill. Others spoke of how their hearts were warmed and how they sensed divine truth when he taught. But on the other hand, many spoke viciously of him, saying things like, "Who does he think he is? God?" Others said something about it being good that one should die for the nation. That was part of their religious battle, though. The streets were abuzz. No one seemed neutral about the day's activities. One side or the other, no compromise, it seemed. I realized I should be more alert than usual. Perhaps some of his supporters might try to interfere, or an overzealous enemy might want to kill him before we could. Which, when I say out loud, seems funny. What did it matter to us? Dead is dead. When I saw him, though, I was caught off guard. He was being led to the road to make his way to the garbage dump where we executed the criminals. Looking weak and fatigued, the lashing of the 39 stripes obviously had taken its toll on him, but it does on everybody. Most have to be dragged there. A crown of thorns had been driven into his head and streaks of blood had dried on his face. The three prisoners were instructed to pick up their crosses, and off we headed towards the garbage dump. But after he walked a while, he fell to his knees and dropped the cross. I was so irritated with him. I quickly had my men enlist a stranger from the crowd to carry the heavy beam. I thought, let's get on with it. I had better things to do. On the way to the hill, though, I noticed that crowds were getting larger and larger. Many cursed him. Others cried for him. It was bizarre. I scanned the throng, trying to catch a whiff of who his followers might be in case they planned some kind of trouble. By the time we got out to the garbage heap, there was a much larger crowd than normal. Getting there is always the worst part. It takes a few minutes for me to get used to the smell. We did our work. My men drove the steel spikes through the flesh and bones of their palms. We raised the beams up and dropped them in their holes. We waited. I watched. The usual scenario, just waiting for them to die. The man in the middle was getting all of the crowd's attention, though. Some were mean and vindictive in what they said and how they acted. Once someone from the crowd started to give Jesus a sponge with vinegar, but others stopped him, saying tauntingly, "Leave him alone, he's called out for Elijah. Let Elijah help him." In the eyes of others, I could see hurt, disappointment, despair. Obviously, they were his followers. I thought I would have to watch them closely to make sure they didn't try to rescue him. But in some unexplainable way, I knew that they didn't have it in them. I thought about some of his other followers who had deserted him. I was disappointed in their weakness. Typical Jews. They should have stood up for him when he was arrested. Then perhaps I wouldn't have to be killing him. I watched the criminals. The two criminals on the outside did the usual. They were bitter and angry, cursing their fate, their trial, the gathering crowds, my men. I'd seen all this before. I watched them though. I don't make too much of this because it wasn't bothering me at all, but as a Roman I would prefer not to crucify innocent persons. Not that I was squeamish, not that I cared much if Jews were innocent or not, but it did bother me a little to suspect that we were killing an innocent person. And this time, we soldiers knew that this man was being thrown to the wolves, not because of what he had done, but as a political sacrifice to keep Pilate in the good graces of the Jewish religious leaders. But then it wasn't our job to be judge and jury. We were just the executioners. I had a duty to do. I couldn't allow myself the luxury of pity, but I had an increasingly growing sense of uneasiness, perhaps maybe even conviction, that he was innocent and that what was being done to him was unjust. I saw that he was the victim of religious bigotry and petty politics. He was different though, not the whiny crying, "I'm innocent" type. I noticed his bravery and I respected it. Good for him, I thought. Take it like a Roman. He didn't shrink back. He didn't seem to be trying to get out of it, but at the same time I couldn't escape his serenity. Up there on that cross in tremendous pain, stripped, humiliated, exposed to elements and insects, he seemed so calm, sure of himself, at peace with it, composure. As a witness of many executions, I had never seen anyone face it like he did. He really caught my attention with one of his prayers. As the crowds continued at him unmercifully, uncivilly, he prayed. I've never been one for prayer myself. Father, forgive them. My respect was growing. At one point, he even engaged in a conversation with one of the two thieves. I couldn't make out what he said over the crowd. I could tell that he was comforting the man on his right. And then there was an oddly tender moment when he entrusted the care of his mother to one of his friends. Was this man one of his followers? They no longer worry me. Let me tell you, I'm a good judge of character. We have to be in my line of work. We have many occasions to determine one's character. This was not normal behavior for a man in his situation. I'll be honest with you, I grew to respect him. I thought I wouldn't mind having him on my side if my back was against the wall. So it began to bother me more and more, his innocence, his actions, the crowds, all of it. It haunted me that I had allowed my men to leave that crown made of thorns on his head. It really wasn't necessary. I still couldn't understand why everybody was so upset about the man. Fear, jealousy, I don't know. I began to have a sense that some divine work was going on though. My respect was turning to reverence, to awe, then darkness. The sun went out. My normal first reaction would be to scan the crowd, get my men ready. Darkness would provide the ultimate cover for an escape plan. But for some reason, I didn't worry about that. I somehow sensed that this man had no plans to escape. He was right where he needed, actually wanted to be. After 3 hours of darkness, he cried out in his native tongue. I couldn't make out what he said exactly, but I knew he had cried out to God as his Father. And even more, after watching the way he died, I knew he was God's son, and I heard myself declaring to others, surely this man was the Son of God.